Alleged to have fired shots at the White House Correspondents Gala dinner held at the Washington Hilton Hotel has been identified as a 31-year-old California teacher, Cole Allen. According to law enforcement authorities, the suspect, who was armed with a shotgun and multiple knives, raced through the security checkpoints in the hotel lobby. A security service officer was shot and is recovering in the hospital. The incident prompted the immediate evacuation of U.S. President Donald Trump, First Lady Melania Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, and other guests from the venue. Meanwhile, U.S. Attorney Janine Pirro says the suspect faces 2 charges, which include using a firearm during a crime of violence and assault on a federal officer using a dangerous weapon.
The defendant will be arraigned on Monday in federal district court. But make no mistake, there will be many more charges based upon the information that we are learning in this very fluid situation.
The suspect in this case, he was not struck by gunfire. However, he was transported to a local hospital to be evaluated. Again, we're very early in the investigation. We have members of the United States Secret Service, the Metropolitan Police Department, and the FBI here to continue to investigate this matter. But at this point, it does appear he is a lone actor, a lone gunman. There does not appear to be any sort of danger to the public at this time.
Simon Marks, our U.S. correspondent, joins us now live for more on this. Simon, thank you very much for your time. I wonder how Americans are framing this, looking at the fact that this was the first time that Donald Trump is attending as a sitting president. He boycotted, some saying stayed away during his first tenure. But on the other side, there's the issue of the relationship that he has with the media.
Oh, without question, Linda Newsway, it's a very good question to start with. I mean, Donald Trump was attending this dinner here in Washington, D.C. last night precisely because he feels more comfortable with the composition of the White House press corps in this, his second term in office, than he did in the first term in office. And that White House press corps has been deliberately swelled by his press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, with a growing number of representatives of pro-Trump web-based outlets, streaming channels, and in many cases, the men and women who get to ask President Trump questions at pool events in the White House every day are not actually reporters. They are, in many cases, propagandists representing propaganda outlets. Now, the White House Correspondents Association, which traditionally has run the White House press arrangements in the briefing room, has had its powers largely expropriated by Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt over the last year. It still exists nonetheless. The dinner itself dates all the way back to the 1920s. President Calvin Coolidge in 1924 was the first president invited to make remarks at a dinner, a much smaller scale event than this one. The other thing that is important to understand is that over the last 20 years, and this predates Donald Trump's arrival in Washington, D.C., a handful of members of the permanent Washington elite decided that they were going to change the nature and character of this event. So now, today, it is celebrity-studded. It is Washington's answer to the Oscars out on the West Coast. This is the biggest event on the calendar. And there are real ethical questions about the news organizations that choose still to participate in this dinner and the Radio Television Correspondents Association dinner later in the year that is held for congressional correspondents, because it does reveal, and this is on absolute clear display here today to the wider public, the somewhat cozy relationship that exists between the news media in this town and the people in power that they cover, whether those people happen to be Trump Republicans or Biden Democrats or Obama Democrats or Trump Republicans the first time around. So this was a complicated event. It was a controversial event last night in this town. And on top of everything else that we've seen, massive questions now being asked about the nature of the security operation at the Hilton Hotel where this dinner was being held. A hotel which has form, because it is the same hotel where John Hinckley Jr. attempted to assassinate President Ronald Reagan back in the 1980s, which makes it all the more astonishing that the security arrangements last night appear to have been so lax.
And looking at, the layout of the hotel, one wonders why some authorities are labeling the motive around perhaps the attack on Trump's administration, because there's a bit of a distance from where the suspect was apprehended to where Donald Trump and some of the members of his administration were seated.
Yeah, I think we should be clear that President Trump was in no real danger from this attack. I mean, as you correctly observe, the alleged gunman tried to breach a metal detector on the ground floor level of the hotel. The dinner itself was taking place a floor below in the basement ballroom. So, we know that the gunfire that was exchanged between the alleged attacker and members of the Secret Service and the police took place on the first floor of the hotel. He never got close to going downstairs and to breaching the ballroom. As to the motive for the attack, within the last few minutes, Fox News reporters say that they have spoken to the alleged gunman's sister. The alleged gunman is called Cole Allen, 31 years of age, from California. And according to family members, the suspect did write a manifesto in which he clearly stated that he wanted to target administration officials. His social media accounts, again according to the reporting of Fox News White House correspondent Jackie Heinrich, were replete with anti-Trump and anti-Christian rhetoric. His brother had become so concerned about his behavior that he had reportedly notified police in New London, Connecticut, of Mr. Allen's alleged manifesto. And the Secret Service have apparently interviewed his sister, who lives in the Washington, D.C. Region, and she reportedly has told police that her brother had a tendency to make radical statements, and his rhetoric constantly referenced a plan to do something to fix the issues with today's world. So there is evidence to support the notion that this was a politically motivated effort to try and breach security and to get to that ballroom where President Trump was about to entertain 2,000 suited and booted guests. But it is not accurate to say that this was in any way an attempt on the president's life that came close to fruition, and that is due to the work of those security teams on the ground floor level of the hotel. I think the real question is, why were the only people required to go through security people who were coming to the hotel to go to the presidential dinner? Anybody else coming to the hotel didn't apparently have to go through any security at all. So you could have carried anything you like into that building, unless and until you tried to get to the ballroom and went through those security magnetometers. You weren't screened in any way, and that raises huge questions about the vulnerability of that hotel to potentially a much more carefully planned, coordinated and orchestrated attack.
Simon, it's quite interesting that you raised those observations around who could have potentially been targeted, not Trump himself, because responding to this, he says he studied assassinations and it seems they usually attack people who have great impact.
Yeah, I mean, that honestly doesn't entirely stand up to historical scrutiny. I mean, we tend not to remember President Gerald Ford, who took over from Richard Nixon after the Watergate era, as a particularly impactful president. I mean, he survived 2 assassination attempts in 1975, and Donald Trump's own predecessor, the man that he constantly dubs Sleepy Joe, Joe Biden himself, there was an attempt to ram a truck through a security barrier at the White House in the middle of 2023. The president was working in the White House at the time, so that was deemed an assassination attempt by a neo-Nazi who said that he was trying to depose President Joe Biden. So there's no question that any sitting president of the United States is a magnet for death threats. There is a long tradition, tragic tradition, of political violence in this country. The president himself last night intoning the name of former President Abraham Lincoln, who of course was shot to death as he watched a play in a theatre here in Washington, D.C. But the fact of the matter is that while the president last night paid tribute to the Secret Service and said that the way in which they had responded to this attempted attack had gone exactly the way it was supposed to go, had been, had worked and had neutralized the threat to him, to other members of the administration, and to the numerous celebrities and stars from the world of media and business that were attending the dinner. There are major questions about the nature of security. I see multiple reports from people who attended the dinner that when you went through security, all you had to do was show your invitation. There was no identity check to tie your invitation to prove that you were the person named on the invitation, which again seems absolutely staggering. But also, if you just take a step back and realize that the rest of the hotel was insecure, it was open to anybody walking through the doors and going about their business elsewhere in the hotel, where, by the way, large numbers of media organizations were holding their own pre-dinner and after-dinner parties. I mean, that is staggering, because anybody could have shown up with a major explosive device, not gone through any form of security, and launched potentially an absolutely devastating attack on that building that could have done untold damage here. So there will be a major review of security and of the procedures surrounding this. I think it's worth also making the point that the president last night said that if he'd got his White House ballroom built by now, they wouldn't have had to be at the hotel, because they could have done it in the far more secure environment of the White House. And it does seem to me that if there is one lingering impact of what the alleged gunman did last night, it may well be that it supercharges the president's argument for that ballroom to be constructed on terrain that formerly, of course, housed the East Wing of the White House until he tore it down.
Yeah, and we know that the suspect, Simon, will be making an appearance at the federal court very soon. But of course, this raises questions about gun violence in the United States. And some say this is what children go through on a daily basis. Children in schools go through this, and they don't have the luxury of high security whisking them away.
No, well, I mean, that's absolutely true. I mean, there are, of course, magnetometers at the entrances to schools, metal detectors all over the United States, which is in and of itself an extraordinary commentary on the prevalence of gun violence here. I can tell you that in my own family, we had an experience when my youngest son was attending our local state school a few years ago, and there was what was believed to be an attempt to breach the school. Shots were fired outside it, and any parent that goes through something like that and gets messages, you know, on your cell phone from your kid saying we're being locked down, there's been a shooting outside the school. It's a terrifying experience, and it's repeated every single day all over the country. Incidents of mass gun violence continue to take place with absolutely no efforts whatsoever on the horizon to tighten gun controls in a country where those controls are notoriously lax. The suspect in this case, as you heard earlier from US Attorney Jeanine Pirro, is undoubtedly going to face additional charges. I mean, there are questions now about whether he could face federal charges for transporting weapons across state lines, because they believe, investigators, that he took a train from California to Washington, D.C., all the way across the country through Chicago. It's not immediately clear when and where he acquired the knives, the pistol and the handgun that he was carrying allegedly carrying in last night's attempted attack. So I think he's at the very early stages of what is going to be a long and punishing legal journey as they try to attach additional federal charges against him. But in terms of whether this changes the calculus in the United States about gun control, we didn't hear a thing from the president about that last night. Lots of talk about the ballroom, not a word about gun control.
Extraordinary story there. Simon Marks is our U.S. correspondent. Thank you very much for that, talking to us about that shooting that happened at the White House Correspondents Dinner last night. So certainly one of the big stories to watch as we enter the new week. All right, let's take